All right, next little grouping, dynamics and tension and unity to kind of wrap this all up here. So dynamics, tension, and unity, again, big terms that have lots of synonyms and things, but let's just jump into them. So dynamics is basically how our eye moves around. We've talked about movement already, and that's basically how the way that things are arranged to create that sense of movement. So here's a Kandinsky composition 8. This painting is famous for all these sort of random abstract images, and the idea here is that the little white circle that's kind of up in the upper third, you see this is kind of like the Star Trek emblem right there, that little triangle near the top of the image, the little white circle with the kind of green halo around it. That's really the focal point of this image. So Kandinsky's playing around with like how much kind of distracting stuff can I put on a composition and yet have that river delta, right? The point where the eye is eventually going to land be something so subtle as a little off-white circle. So that's what a lot of these compositional experiments are, studies in how the eye moves around through dynamics. So if we look at an image like this, I can't imagine a picture more still. So here it's centered right in the middle of the image. It's kind of hazy. There's not a lot of detail. It's black and white. We don't even get the excitement of color. The one leading line in it could be a diagonal if it was leading off, but no, it's going right vertical, right up the center of the image. I mean, you can then get the little horizontal, the horizon. I mean, you could not create an image that was designed to be more still than this image. So all of the elements of this image are creating a sense of stasis. And here, this one's very similar. We've got a little bit more triangle happening in the foreshortening of the dock going on here, but a lot of horizontals, this very strong horizon line right to the middle of our subject matter, this little cabin on the water. Again, very still, very balanced, very tranquil composition. Whereas in verticals are strong and stable but static. So columns, towers, trees, that kind of stuff. Things that are going straight up and down are a little bit more interesting than horizontals, but they're not really in motion. But diagonals have energy and motion, and most importantly, they make triangles, and oftentimes lots of triangles. And triangles are all through art. Even in an image of a still life, it might be full of triangles. So we can take a look at this little screenshot here and say this is a beautiful triangle. Look at this big slab of rock that's been here for millennia, right? And then she's standing there with the staff running behind her, creating a very solid triangle. So some strong horizontals with the horizon, the clouds, the sea, the edge of the cliff, right? And then there's the triangle of her on the rock, and it's creating a long horizontal edge for that triangle. So that's very powerful, but it is less dynamic, which is a great thing for this moment, right? So equilateral triangles with horizontal bottoms aren't going anywhere. Very strong, they're going to be there forever. But flip it upside down, triangles without level bottoms are in tension, or they're being balanced, or they're in motion, right? This pyramid can't stay this way for long. So just to recap all of these, horizontals are stable, calm, static. They can lie there forever, right? If there's a column lying in the woods, it'll be there until it breaks apart. Verticals are strong and powerful, but also static. So it took energy to get them into that position when the column was raised or the tree grew or whatever it was. And they eventually will fall over and crash, releasing that energy. But for now, that energy is held in stasis. But diagonals are in motion or in tension. Something cannot be diagonal without something holding it. So somebody's holding a staff or a sword or something, right? Or a board is kind of nailed to a wall as a brace or something. Or it's in motion. Somebody has thrown that board and it's spinning through the air and we're catching it in a moment of motion. So diagonals implicitly imply tension or motion. So a diagonal line can give us a direction of movement, but just one is going to take us out of the composition. So we're just going to follow this contrail up to the plane. Oh, look, nice plane. And then we're just going to keep on going to the upper right corner and done. But if we superimpose a couple other contrails in there, now we've got some triangles going on to keep our eyes in the composition. So we might go up to the plane and then bounce around for a while there in those triangles before we eventually get tired of this fairly dull image. But those extra triangles are going to make it a whole lot more interesting than just that one diagonal line. So it's not just diagonals, it's triangles especially. So 3 focal points can create triangles as well. So here's a photograph of a woman standing in a room looking at a bottle, and that window, the bottle, and the woman's face is creating a triangle. We can flip that triangle upside down and we can see there's a very strong triangle shape in the woman if we include the broken chair that she's holding in that. So an image that might not necessarily seem like it has a lot of triangles does have some very important triangles. And there might also be a very dominant principal triangle in an image and then other diagonal shapes all over the image to make it busy and interesting and keep our eye moving around. This image too is a little concept art. This little red poppy down in there. So yes, it's a World War One video games and the poppy symbol of World War One, all that kind of stuff. But this one little red dot, I can't help to think that that little dot is there to represent the blood that is about to be shed, or more importantly, to add a third element in this image to get our eye kind of bouncing around. Otherwise, it's very much of a tennis game. It's like bung, 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 right back and forth between the two guys. Well, now we've got a triangle by adding that little splash of red down and that little poppy in the field that I can't help is there. I can't help but think is there for that reason. Even in an image like this that seems like it's dominated by horizontals and verticals, we've got these columns and stairs, but the rest of the composition is really very triangle shaped. All those triangles leading us to our disinterested nobleman here, or whatever he is, standing on the top of the stairs. Tension, again, kind of one of these strange terms. That what does tension really mean? It's sort of easier to show than talk about. So angles and objects that are near but not touching each other create tension. Objects that are breaking through the edge of the composition, objects that are near the edge of the composition, and objects that are in triangles at points of a triangle are going to create composition, or objects that are surrounded by things. Lots of things that are creating tension, the way that our eye is moving through. So here's otherwise sort of still kind of feel, but right after the battle, this is the duel, right? So there was a lot of energy a few minutes ago, right, when these guys were going at it, and now it's sort of the end. It's after the climax of this story that we're being told here. The victor is being let off, and they're heading 2 seconds from now, they're going to be out of the shot, right, out of the frame. They're going out, pulling away from this other shape. And now we've got this, our victim here slowly being lowered to the ground, the shape of all that mass leading to the other guy's sword lying there in the snow, and we've got this tension of these 3 points bouncing around this image. That's a really good example of what I'm talking about, where these two shapes are pulling away. This guy's lowering to the ground, these guys are walking away, they're pulling away from each other. The other guy is near the edge of the composition. There's a lot going on here in terms of tension. Lots of diagonals can make an image look like it's bursting outward. So here's again radial symmetry in a sense. And we've got this writer coming out of the gap, this great little bit of negative space, this blade of sky coming down, and all these diagonals. And this guy is going to be past us in a second. We're going to blink our eye, and the writer will have blown past us in this real kind of explosive composition. Let's take a look at the way that focus, different areas of focus can create tension or the lack of it. So here's a photoshopped image of a photograph, right? I've darkened it all up. So you've got a nice little kind of sky and a little bit of reflection going on. It's sort of pretty, quiet still. Not a lot for us to look at. Kind of a big block of darkness off to the side there. It's a little... Well, okay, let's turn the light on that house over there. So we'll brighten up that house and we'll turn on the light. All right, well, now we've got an interesting little focal point. We're looking at that little window, and we might wander around in the shadows there a little bit and move on. So not terribly exciting. Or we could switch that and turn the light on at the end of the canal there, down at the church. And that really brings our focus. We're kind of going down the canal to that light. It's nice, but again, big, heavy, dark spot on the one side. It's a strange composition. Well, what if we cropped it just to the one house? Well, that's a nice little snapshot. It's a little interesting little moment there with the light in the window. That's okay. Not terribly dynamic, though. Same thing in the other direction. Now, by this cropping, it's a little bit more interesting because we do get the kind of one-point perspective happening. The boats in the foreground are suddenly a lot more interesting. The reflection is now really paying attention to that a lot more in the canal. So this helps a little bit in the composition, but not as much as the original composition did, where we had both lights on. And now we've got the tension between those two right in the center of the image and the light near the edge of the image. There's two planes of light. We've got tension between those two, our eyes moving back and forth and picking it. As we're going back and forth, we're picking up other details in the image, like the boats and the reflection and the shape of the sky. There's enough interest, enough tension between these 2 points of focus to keep our eye interested long enough. The way that we might have looked at some of those other cropped images or the darker images and said, oh, that's nice, and moved on. Here we're going to spend some time exploring this picture. Now unity, to kind of wrap it all up, unity is sort of a really big one that's basically just all of the other elements working together to create a clear and pleasing image. Clear meaning that the image, like the point of the image, the focal point, the story that is being told is clear, and that we spend some time looking at it pleasingly. So a harmonious image is using those things as well. This is a great photograph. It's got diagonals, it's got horizontals. He's on a third. He's silhouette behind the sky behind him. We have some pleasing color combinations. We have all the splash of water catching a moment in the air. Really, there's a lot of nice things going on. This is a lovely photograph. Very harmonious, using a lot of the elements of design that we've been talking about. It might be easier to actually talk about them in their absence. So maybe you have a Christmas tree, like a lot of us do, that is covered with ornaments that we've collected over our lifetimes. Maybe some ornaments that you made as a kid. Maybe there's, some that the family's kind of collected over the years. Oh, remember when we took that trip and we bought this ornament on our vacation, right? So we might have a tree that we look at that is so full of memories, and it's our nostalgia, it's our tree, it's beautiful to us because it's covered with all of the things that remind us of our happy Christmases of the past. And yet somebody else looks at that tree that doesn't have that context and says, wow, that looks like a total jumble, right? There's very little unity. We've got all different kinds of shapes and sizes and colors, and there's just a big garage sale of assembly. Well, if you were hired to design a tree for a photo shoot or a mall or a public building or something like that, you probably would create a tree that's a whole lot more elegant and has some unity. Now, these three trees are lovely. They may not have the sort of personal interest and nostalgia that our own funky Christmas trees might have, but we can look at similar sized ornaments, or all lights of all the same color, or a strong color theme, or, there's something unifying. There's choices that have been made to kind of limit the number of things that are being used, so that it isn't just a hodgepodge of different things, but that there's things that are very like and pleasing and work well together. So these three trees obviously more elegant than the first tree, showing unity, even though they may not be as special to us as our own tree covered with our awkward little ornaments on it, but they're certainly better designed trees, to put it that way. Let's take a look at another example of that, sort of unity of form. There's a whole Gestalt Theory. There's a huge range of psychology and art where they sort of interline about why one curve looks good or one sort of shape, or how we take an information and interpret it through our brains. So Gestalt Theory is fascinating. Reinhardt's Gestalt Theory really coming out of psychology. But we could spend a whole other lecture just talking about all the various kinds of unities. But in this case, let's look at the unity of form here, where we have a whole bunch of similar rocks, and then we have the starfish. So we've got one thing that it's higher value, it's brighter, and then it's the one thing that is unique. But if we drop a cigarette butt into the scene, well, then suddenly that's really pulling our focus. Even though blue and orange go well together, right? That's a nice harmonious color composition, but it's pulling a lot of focus. It's out of place. If this was a photograph for an anti-littering campaign or an anti-smoking PSA or something like that, it's like, yeah, that'd be very effective, because really our eye is going straight to that cigarette butt there, because it's different than the rest of the things. It's really out of unity, out of harmony with the other elements. Okay, so let's get rid of the cigarette butt. It's disgusting, and let's put a rock in its place instead. Well, okay, that doesn't work either. That's sticking out like a sore thumb, because it's not in the same color family, right? It's a field stone, first of all. It's a different kind of rock than all the other kind of shore washed rocks. And it's very orange yellow rock as opposed to all this sort of blue dawn at the beach kind of colored rocks. All right, so let's drop down its color temperature. Let's make it really, really cool, and maybe place it in a little bit better spot there, a little bit up a little bit. It's better. It's still kind of the odd one out, right? Because it's a different kind of rock than any of the other rocks in the composition. But boy, it's a lot less distracting than either the cigarette butt or the rock before we positioned it a little better, and most importantly, changed its color. So that leads us to color palette, the range of colors in a composition, and the tighter the range, the more unity. Now that doesn't mean that you can't have colorful images. That just means that a whole scattered random bit of color, like our Christmas tree, is going to be disjointed, and it's just going to feel busy, and it's going to be hard to see what we're looking at. So if you have 3 colors, 5 colors, odd numbers of colors tend to be good, and you've got a nice tight palette. There can be a range of colors, highlight and shadow, that kind of thing. So it doesn't need to be like spot colors, like posterized, like the Hope poster. I mean, you can have lots of variations of those colors, but you don't want to have a whole bunch of colors floating around unless you're using one color, like the girl in the red dress in Schindler's List or red coat, to really pull focus. If you're going to add a color that's not part of your color palette, wow, is that going to pull focus, like a cigarette butt? And maybe that's a good thing, right? If that's what your goal is, to have something out of that. Well, you can have a monochromatic painting. It's very common in watercolor studies where somebody will paint, in this case, looks like ultramarine, Prussian blue maybe. Just that. We got the white of the paper, and we got various levels of the blue paint to create a monochromatic painting. Still totally clear what we're looking at in this painting, right? But it's only one color of paint. too many colors or a conflicting palette can be confusing and can really lack unity. So these two pictures on the left here, I'm like, what is going on? It's like acid trips. I have no idea what's happening. These are really busy. Where are we supposed to be looking? It's kind of crazy and surreal. And then the one on the right, a little less busy, but some really unpleasing colors used together. It isn't that the people's faces are unnatural colors. It's that all the colors are just so clashy that it does not look like a very particular image. I think most of us can agree that the dragon on the right is a little bit more bold and strong than this kind of Technicolor Dreamcoat dragon on the left. It's way too busy, way too many colors going on. I have to confess, I actually exaggerated some of those colors to make it even worse than the original, so the original isn't quite that bad. But looking at the dragon on the right here, we see three colors, right? There's the red, the brown, and the yellow. Well, there's more than just those three colors. That's what I was talking about. So we have the shade tan colors of the yellow shaded areas. We have a few little highlight colors in there. We've got the really dark maroon stripes on the wings, even though the wing is basically red, but then we've got the darker, that's what I'm talking about. It's like there's three. How many colors in this dragon? Three. How many colors in the image? A lot more than three, probably more like 10 or 12, right? If you were to go around with the eyedropper and like pick all these little colors, but it's a nice tight composition, nice tight palette, which makes it seem a lot more organized, a lot more put together than this crazy dragon on the left. So again, can't stress this enough. A polychromatic image, a colorful image, can still have color unity. So the pop art Bowie over here has a whole bunch of colors on there, but they're all really, really bold. If there was one kind of like sage green kind of gradient in there, that would be like, what's that? That would be the odd one out, right? That would be the one that would not fit in. So the Gauguin up here, with our Tahiti image, those are all really warm, biased colors. So we've got the ultramarine blue and the reds and the pinks and the flesh tones and all that's really hot. Tahiti's hot, and it's a magical place. But it is really a very unified color palette, even though it is very colorful. And then we've got all these strong saturated pastel colors down here in the desert image. Again, very colorful, but unified colors. Let's talk about color temperature, because I've kind of alluded to it a couple of times here. So color temperature is basically whether it's warm or cool. Same image with different filters on it. One looks like kind of afternoon light, and one looks like the dusk. The sun has set, or maybe she's in a deep shadow somewhere. Basically the same image with just different color temperatures. Here's another good example of that, where we can see the color palette, the warm version and the cool version. Look at the shadows down in the lower left-hand corner. On the warm version, it's really purple. On the cool version, it's very cold blue. Look at the highlight of the snow in the foreground there, where on the warm version, it's almost a kind of a taupey color, and it's sort of icy blue in the cool version. So you can really see each one. You could go around and look at this carefully and see each one of these colors, slight variations on the other color, one to warm it up and one to really chill it down a bit. And be aware that there are warm and cool versions of all colors. We're sort of told in school, in elementary school, we take the color wheel and we cut it in half. One half is warm, one half is cool. Well, not really, because what do you do with green or purple? The only one that's an exception to that is orange, because orange is made up of red and yellow. But then some arguments whether or not orange should really be on the color wheel anyway. But we can certainly look at purple, for example. What's purple made up of? Red and blue. So you've got a quote-unquote warm color and a cool color mixing together to create purple. You can take a look at like the ultramarine blue that's down there. That's got a lot of red in it, right? That real rich blue is way up on the purple side of the color spectrum there, and has a whole lot more red in it than an actual cyan color does. I really would make a case, I think we should like drop orange out of the color spectrum and bring in cyan, because it's like that's sort of the missing color, how important the cyan is to our color palettes. But we've had these biased colors, or colors that are leaning one side or the other. So a bluey green and a yellowy green, right? So that's a blue, cool, blue biased green, that aqua colored green, or that yellowy, bright spring green, lime green, whatever you want to call it, that's leaning toward the yellow, a warm green. So there are warm and cool versions of all the colors depending upon whether they are leaning toward their neighbor. The only one that leans both directions is warm is orange. But be aware of that the color wheel, all these little divisions, these little 6 pie pieces that we've cut out, or 12, or however we want to slice it up, those are artificial lines. Those are lines that we've put down and names that we've applied to those colors. So don't get hung up on, oh, well, but the complementary color of green is red. Well, look at this color wheel here. Is it? So it depends on what kind of green you're looking at. Maybe an aqua green, almost cyan, is kind of across some red. But otherwise, that sort of lime green, that kind of big spring, what we think of as green, Crayola green, is really across from much more magenta purple color than it is across from red. So it gets really kind of confusing when we start trying to use that color wheel for really strong color palettes. Oh, it's got to be red and green. It's got to be blue and orange, right? Well, it depends on what shade of blue or what shade of orange you're talking about. And the direction, intensity, and the color of the light will affect the highlight and shadow colors. So the stronger the light, the deeper the shadow is going to be, the brighter the reflections are going to be, the more diffused the light, the more it's going to be sort of bouncing around and fill in those dark shadows. And then the temperature of the light is going to affect the temperature of the shadow. So warm light, cool shadow, warm shadow.